Yeah, I'm excited to join you here from the city of Vancouver and tell you a little story about our city. We're about 600,000 people in a metro area of about 2.5 million people. And I'll pull up a slide so you can look at my slides. But we're in a metro area of about 2.5 million, so we're not particularly huge. We're not particularly huge by city standards. We're the third largest city in Canada. I assume, Zach, everyone can see the slides now.
Yep, you're all good.
Wonderful. I've been a civil servant for about 7 years. So I've worked with the city of Vancouver. It'll be 7 years this April. And one of the goals that we have as a city, that we've set it as a city, is to make building Passivhaus as easy and as profitable as it is to build the code minimum. So that guides a lot of our work. There was a dialogue in the breakout group that I was part of around, like, how do you get people to build Passivhaus? Well, really quickly, and I'll touch on this in my presentation, but you remove barriers in a city, you remove barriers to building Passivhaus, and then you put in place incentives that put that project in a similar place when you include risk, in a similar place financially that they would have been if they just built the worst building they could legally build, aka code minimum. So that's one of the kind of guiding pieces for the city of Vancouver, and thankfully we don't have to do it alone. I noticed a number of other names here from Vancouver, including Leighton Williams, he's certified Passivhaus tradesperson, and he heads our inspections group. And he has a couple of inspectors under his management that will go out to any Passivhaus project. So you get a Passivhaus trained inspector when you're working on a Passivhaus project. So it reduces time. The goal is to reduce time for projects. And not to put up other barriers. I also saw Scott, Kennedy, Ian, Roberto, obviously Monty, Melvin, Killian, and Stuart. So there's a good few other practitioners. So while I present today as an individual, I really want to highlight that that it really is a team effort. There's many people here at the city that are working on this effort alongside me, and there's many people in the industry that make it possible. The last piece before I jump into my formal presentation is it's important to kind of gauge success. If we look in the North American context, I believe the most successful energy-focused standard is the Energy Star standard. And the largest sort of market penetration I saw in the US and in Canada was around 15%. So sometimes we debate, does every building have to be Passivhaus? And in Vancouver, we've taken the approach of encouraging Passivhaus and rewarding Passivhaus, but also bringing up the energy standard so all buildings achieve a significant greenhouse gas reduction. And we take what we've learned through Passivhaus and in Passivhaus and try to apply it to all buildings. So with that, I'll jump into my slide presentation. I talked a little bit about the city and our size, so very comparable to a number of other municipalities. So we're not particularly large. You don't have to be a big city to do this. And you don't have to have decades and decades of experience. When I joined the city in 2014, the city had not been able to make significant greenhouse reductions outside of single family homes. We're actually seeing increasing greenhouse gases from commercial buildings. So it's not like we had a huge head start. So if you're in a city and you're like, wow, we're nowhere near there, you can get there in a few years with a few steps, which I'll touch on. So one of the first things we did is we looked at where does our carbon pollution come from? Well, 54% of it comes from natural gas use for buildings, in heating and providing hot water in buildings. Vancouver is a heating dominated climate, so we have some air conditioning, but not everyone has air conditioning, and not everyone needs air conditioning. But heating really drives our greenhouse gas profile as a city. It even goes over and above gasoline and diesel for transportation. So that's one of the reasons why Passivhaus is kind of an ideal standard because it focuses on envelope reductions. And we're also a jurisdiction that has electricity that's about 9 to 12 cents a kilowatt hour. And we have a natural gas that is 2 to 3 cents a kilowatt hour equivalent. So if you're going to transition off of a fossil fuel like natural gas to electricity, which in British Columbia is 98% hydro, you need to greatly reduce the amount of energy. So where have we gone over the last little over 10 years in terms of carbon reductions? Well, we've gone from in 2007 to 2019, we've seen about a 9% reduction, and the 2020 number looks about 10%. We need to get to 50%. So what Vancouver did in 2019 is we declared a climate emergency. So we declared a climate emergency. There's 6 big moves. I won't go into them tonight. So big move 1 is walkable, complete neighborhoods. Big move 2 is active transportation and transit. Big move 3 is zero emissions vehicles. Big move 4 is zero emission space and water heating, which I'll touch on tonight. Big move 5 is low carbon materials, so embodied carbon. And 6 is around restoration and coastal forests. So we'll only really touch on big move 4 and how Passivhaus is helping us to achieve big move 4. But if you're interested in the climate emergency and all those moves, you can Google climate emergency Vancouver and see our response there. All right, there we go. So big move 4 is zero emissions space and water heating. Passivhaus has really helped us to build industry capacity around high performance buildings. If you look in some other sectors like the auto sector, I mean, they have F1, they have racing to kind of develop their product supply and innovation. And in Vancouver, we have Passivhaus. So Passivhaus has really helped to rapidly develop our industry from producing a lot of very modestly performing products to producing a full range of high performance products ready for the next code cycle. With Passivhaus, we're able to support early owner action. So I'll talk about some of the incentives that we've put in place and some of the barriers removed a little bit later. But it's really allowed us to advance our code quicker by demonstrating what's possible with Passivhaus. If you want to learn a little bit more, I'd suggest Googling the Zero Emissions Building Plan plus Vancouver, and you can view our plan, which highlights how we're working to encourage Passivhaus and make Passivhaus sort of the first choice that builders and developers look to and at least consider. So before I go into some of the steps that we've taken as a city to make building Passivhaus easier, I thought I'd do a little bit of a retrospective. Where were we? Where are we? If we go back to 2014, we had one single Passivhaus under construction, and this wasn't it, but this is a Passivhaus under construction in Vancouver. The single Passivhaus under construction at the time, if you talk to the person that built it, he will only have swear words about his dialogue with the city of Vancouver. And that was sort of the starting point in 2014. Now, if we jump to 2020, we've got 364 passive dwellings either under construction or completed. And we've got 4,713 that are in for permit or inquiry, including this high rise, which recently cleared its rezoning stage of permit review. So it's advancing significantly through the process, which is pretty exciting for us because obviously a large building brings a lot of innovation and brings a lot of global interest and supply chain improvements. I talk a bit about supply chain improvements because if you don't have the products available, it's just that much more expensive. In 2014, there was 0 Passivhaus window manufacturers that were producing products locally from local extrusions. There was one company that was importing. Now in 2020, we have 6 Passivhaus window manufacturers producing products locally in wood, in vinyl, in aluminum, and fiberglass. So there's a variety of products available locally as well as products that can be brought from abroad. One of the things that's been really helpful as a staff is having companies that talk to council when I'm presenting and bringing forward changes in policy or code to talk about how the shift to high performance has been a business opportunity for them. So there's a local window manufacturer and they spoke to council recently and said they've recently doubled their factory size and 60% of their product is being exported. So it's really great to have those local success stories because some councillors are on board with green buildings. All councillors, in my experience, are on board with growing the green economy. So one of the things that we did with Passivhaus was point to it. So we set a clear destination and path by saying, like, here's the point that we're heading towards. We're heading towards Passivhaus. And why we're going there? Well, the envelope and ventilation systems, those should be considered first, and Passivhaus does that. And taking a page from Passivhaus in our building code, we're stepping down the greenhouse gas, the amount of greenhouse gases allowed, and heat loss limits within our building code. was really helpful as a city to learn that from Passivhaus. There's a lot of research that goes into Passivhaus, and anyone that's been involved in the development of a standard know it takes a long time. And being able to point to a standard like Passivhaus off the shelf is tremendously helpful. Also having the training off the shelf, so being able to have trades training, being able to have a training for certified Passivhaus consultants or designers has been incredibly helpful. These are two passive projects, two towers pursuing Passivhaus in downtown Vancouver. One of the things some people ask, well, what can we do first? What can we do in our city? One of the things is really to communicate with industry and have a dialogue between industry and the city. One of the things Vancouver did is in the basement of City Hall after hours, after City Hall was closed, we paid for a little bit of pizza and some pop. And Monty kindly organized these events where this small growing community of practitioners that grew and grew and grew could meet and talk about Passivhaus. And it was really interesting. It was a safe space to talk about Passivhaus and with not worrying about a competition as much, but you definitely did see, developer XYZ or consultant ABC sent two people this time. Oh, maybe I should communicate back to our office that we should send a couple people. Oh, there's a new project that's coming out. It became this sort of hub that built a community that helped greatly accelerate the transition off fossil fuels broadly in Vancouver and the growth of Passivhaus. Providing a certified Passivhaus trades education through the local trade school is also key. We provide a 50% subsidy if you're a Vancouver-based business or you do work in Vancouver and you're able to demonstrate that. We try to find leaders and develop collaborations with leaders. We found that in our local market, when you talk to architects and you talk to developers, many of them want to do better buildings. There's barriers to that. There's additional risk, and you need to try and help them de-risk the projects. Part of that can be floor space incentives, help hugely, but also removing barriers to building a Passivhaus. We also try to feed leaders. So we have a nearzero.ca, who's been a case study program for low-rise residential. We provide $20,000 in exchange for case study information. And it's a way to provide an incentive early for smaller projects and try to encourage a wider number of projects to try Passivhaus. It's been very successful. And I would say it's now we're migrating to a floor space incentive. So we have a 5% floor space incentive for multifamily buildings. So if you're building a building with 5 dwellings or greater, you can access a 5% floor space incentive. And that's 5% on top of some other relaxations. We also have a 15 and an 18% incentive for single family and duplexes if you're pursuing Passivhaus. There are no other relaxations or incentives for single family or duplex. So the 15 to 18% is more like a 3 to 4% incentive once you consider all of the other relaxations or easements that a multifamily project might get. And certainly last but not least, in terms of what we're trying to do to feed leaders, is someone will help you. So often there's sort of this adversarial relationship between the developer or a builder and City Hall, and neither kind of want to show their cards. And there's an opportunity where if a project's having a problem early on, especially, they can reach out to a staff person like myself, and I could try to problem solve, whether that means trying to get them their occupancy a few days before Christmas and going and sitting in a friendly way with the person that reviews the occupancy permits and make sure all of the holds have been released and try to get them to release the occupancy that day, or whether it's trying to work out an agreement with BC Hydro, our electrical utility, to allow construction within a certain distance of a high voltage feed that has historically been allowed. It's helpful to have someone on the inside troubleshooting. We've also worked to remove barriers. So a big piece is just the city getting out of the way. So we've relaxed some floor space, some height, and some setback limits. There's still more work to do there. We've also provided some flexibility on the frontage and shape and balcony requirements. If you look in the middle of the screen, there's areas that we require T-shaped buildings in Vancouver, and we allow them to be a rectangle or a square if you're a Passivhaus. So just some kind of relaxations and easements. At the same way, we may prescriptively on the right-hand side of the screen require balconies For a passive house, we may allow you to accomplish that with a rooftop balcony if that's desired. We also try to inform our own staff. So I mentioned we're very lucky to have Leighton Williams heading the inspections team as a certified passive house tradesperson. And we've also done presentations. I've done presentations to 10 to 15 different city groups and helped them if they wish to take one-day passive house training, or even a number of them have taken the 5-day and written the exam to get a certification. Because it's helpful when you talk to somebody at the city and you say, we're building a passive house, and they know what you're talking about. We're still working, and there's always people leave and change jobs, so it's kind of a continual process, and we're not quite where we'd like to get to yet, but we're definitely on the way to the point of having city staff trained for every passive house project. Building our own government capacity. So all new civic facilities are going to be built to passive house, and we've trained over 100 city staff as well as trades inspectors. This is our new Fire Hall 17. This is what it looked like in the summer. It's coming together. Got some local Cascadia windows, some Roxel insulation below there. It's pursuing passive house. This is 2 daycares on top of an existing parking garage. One of the things that I've noted on this slide is when we put passive house as a choice for projects that go through rezoning. So in Vancouver, most projects taller than 6 stories go through a rezoning process to add height, to add density. We put passive house as the first, the number 1 choice, just so everyone would have to read it. Because if you read it, you're absorbing at least some of it. You may not want to do it, but you're like, oh, wow, okay, this is something someone does. And I'm not saying that one thing alone has resulted in 20% of projects pursuing passive house, but it certainly helps because everyone has to look at it, everyone has to understand it, and it just if you're considering a first step, if you have any requirements for buildings, considering allowing passive house as an option, because you will see some leaders that will choose that path. Some examples. This is a piece of art. Should I be worried? It's sort of climate change focused in Vancouver. This is a project that didn't hit passive house. It missed passive house certification. The last I saw it was 127 kilowatt hours per meter squared and 0.72 ACH. It's still a great all electric building. It's a 6-story rental, a project that targeted passive house. This is the first certified passive house in Vancouver, single family home. This is the first developer doing a second passive house. I think it's 100 passive homes in a mix of townhouses and apartments. I believe it's all rental. This is a passive house high rise in downtown Vancouver, 485 homes, last I checked. This is our new school, very exciting, very rare. In Vancouver, a group called Vancouver School Board get to build the schools usually, but this one is being built by Vancouver, so we get to make our own decisions. And we've chosen to build it to passive house. There's also going to be a daycare and I think 60 odd or 70 odd dwellings as well, mostly affordable housing. So when I started, I talked about Vancouver and how over a little over 10 years, we'd only reduced by about 9 to 10%. If we switch that from percentage to look at how we'll achieve the 1.5 Celsius warming by 2030, with the Climate Emergency Action Plan, CEAP, we'll actually come very close to hitting that target. And if you include some money and incentives that are available from the province, we're anticipating slightly exceeding, slightly being under 1.5 Celsius by 2030 with these new array of actions, including accelerating high performance buildings using passive house. And I would encourage any city that's considering a transformation or an improvement of their building stock to really look to passive house. Every building doesn't have to be passive house, but all of your buildings will be better for referencing passive house. If you have questions, here are some emails. So again, we work as a team. I told Leighton I wouldn't give out his email, so I haven't. But if you want to talk to anyone about education, you can email Andrea Wickham at vancouver.ca. Zoning bonus density, talk to Charlene Black at vancouver.ca. He developed it. Myself, Chris Higgins at vancouver.ca. Or get to me on Twitter, which I check in the evenings. So you have a better chance of a speedy reply. I maybe just end with a quote, because sometimes people say, well, Vancouver's so small. The quote that I like is from Milton Friedman. He's a Nobel Prize-winning economist. He was from the US. And he says, only a crisis, actual or perceived, produces real change. When that crisis occurs, the actions that are taken depend on the ideas that are lying around. That, I believe, is our basic function, to develop alternatives to existing policies, to keep them alive and available until the politically impossible becomes the politically inevitable. Thanks very much for your time. I'm happy to take questions.